Movies can be disturbing, but the moment you realize they are based on true stories, it adds another layer of darkness. These are 5 disturbing movies based on real events. The German film 3096 Days, released in 2013 and directed by Sherry Horman, is a recreation of one of the most haunting true stories in modern Austria. It follows Natascha Kampusch, a 10-year-old girl kidnapped on her way to school and held captive for 3096 days. The film was made with eerie precision. The chamber where Natascha was imprisoned was rebuilt at full scale. Antonia Campbell Hughes, who played Kampusch, lost a drastic amount of weight to portray her starvation. But no matter how convincing the film looked, nothing could match the terror of what really happened in Vienna on the morning of March 2nd, 1998. It was a Monday morning in the Donaustadt district of Vienna. 10-year-old Natascha Kampusch left her home, just like she always did, walking to school alone for the first time that year. She never arrived. A 12-year-old boy told police he saw her being dragged into a white minivan by 2 men. For a brief moment, the city froze. A child had vanished in broad daylight. Within hours, Austrian police launched one of the largest manhunts in the country's history. Investigators examined 776 white vans, chasing any possible lead. One of those belonged to a man named Wolfgang Przyklopil, a 36-year-old communications technician who lived about 30 minutes outside Vienna in a quiet town called Straßhof an der Nordbahn. Police questioned him. He said he'd been home alone that morning, using his van to haul rubble from house renovations. He seemed calm and polite. They believed him and moved on. That single moment, that one unchecked explanation, would mean 8 more years of captivity for Natascha Kampusch. What no one knew was that the missing girl was trapped right there in Lower Austria, hidden beneath the garage of an ordinary home, behind a steel door concealed by a cupboard. The cellar where Natascha was kept was roughly 8 square meters, about the size of a small walk-in closet. It had no windows and was completely soundproof. To reach it, you had to open a trapdoor in the garage, descend a narrow stairway, and crawl through a hidden steel hatch behind a piece of furniture. For the first 6 months, she wasn't allowed to leave the underground room at all. There was a small bed, a toilet, a few shelves, and little else. Przyklopil told her the outside world was dangerous, that people were looking for her, that her family had abandoned her. Eventually, he began to let her upstairs during the day, only to send her back underground at night or whenever he left for work. For years, Natascha lived this way, spending the daylight hours in silence and returning to the dark each evening, always reminded that any attempt to escape would mean death. Przyklopil controlled everything. He gave her books and educational material to study, telling her she should be grateful. He brought her a television and the radio, but filtered everything, only foreign stations or taped programs, to keep her unaware of the search for her. She later said she found comfort in learning, trying to keep her mind sharp to fight despair. But the cruelty was constant. He beat her so badly that she sometimes couldn't walk. He starved her to keep her weak, then blamed her for her frailty. He forced her to cook and clean for him, to act as his servant. He would mock her appearance, then claim to love her. At times, she fantasized about killing him, but fear always stopped her. Przyklopil told her the doors and windows were rigged with explosives, and that if she tried to run, he would kill her, her family, and the neighbors. When she was allowed upstairs, she tried subtle acts of rebellion, leaving small signs, hoping someone would notice, but nobody ever did. On the few occasions she was seen outside, she appeared calm and obedient. One of Przyklopil's business partners later recalled seeing her in the garden and said she looked relaxed and happy. He had no idea who she was. Years passed. Natascha grew from a child into a teenager. After she turned 18, Przyklopil began taking her on small outings, insisting she pretend to be his relative. They even went skiing once just outside Vienna. People saw them together but thought nothing of it. She later admitted that during that trip she didn't see a real chance to escape. Every minute she was watched. Still, she was planning. On August 23rd, 2006, after 3,096 days in captivity, an opportunity appeared. That afternoon, Psychlopil asked her to vacuum his white van in the garden. As the machine roared, he received a phone call and stepped away, walking toward the house so he could hear. The noise from the vacuum covered her footsteps. She left it running and ran. Barefoot, shaking, she climbed fences, sprinted through neighboring yards, and tried to flag people down. But no one seemed to care. After about 200 meters, she reached the home of a 71-year-old woman named Inge. Desperate, Natasha knocked on her window and said the words that ended her nightmare. "I am Natasha Kampusch." The woman called police immediately. Officers arrived minutes later. It was 1 p.m. Natasha was identified by a small scar, her passport found in the chamber, and DNA testing. She weighed just 48 kilograms or 105 pounds, about the same as when she had disappeared 8 years earlier. Her skin was pale. She had grown only 15 centimeters since childhood, about 6 inches. When Psychlopil realized she was gone, he panicked. He fled in his car and was soon being hunted by Austrian police. That night, he parked near Vienna's Nord station and ended his time on Earth. He had told Natasha many times before that they will never take him alive. Before her escape, Psychlopil had even tried to obtain fake identification papers under a Czech name. He had planned to start a new life, with Natasha by his side. In the months that followed, Natasha Kampusch's case dominated global headlines, but her story didn't fit the simple narrative the media wanted. When she spoke publicly, she refused to reveal intimate details of her abuse. She said she didn't want to be defined by the worst years of her life. Some were confused by the empathy she showed her captor. In one interview, she said, "I feel sorry for him. He was a poor soul." When she learned he was dead, she reportedly cried uncontrollably, and later lit a candle for him in the morgue. Many labeled it Stockholm Syndrome. But Natasha rejected that explanation, calling it dismissive and simplistic. She said her emotions were the result of years of survival fear and dependency. She also fought to reclaim the property where she had been held. The house had been built by Psychlopil's grandfather after World War II, complete with a Cold War-era bomb shelter, the same bunker where she had lived as a child prisoner. When Psychlopil's estate was settled, Natasha claimed ownership of the home. She said she wanted to protect it, not as a memorial but to prevent it from becoming a public spectacle. "It was part of my formative years," she explained. "If I ever sell it, I'll fill in the cellar. It will never become a museum." She kept her promise. In 2011, the underground room was filled in. As of 2017, Natasha Kampusch still owned the house. Her life afterward has been complex. She became a public figure, giving interviews and speaking about recovery and resilience, but she has also struggled with constant public scrutiny, accused by some of being too calm, too composed and too forgiving.
Teilweise gab es so Aktionen seitens meines Vaters, die ich einfach nicht einordnen konnte und verstehen konnte. Und da war es mir einfach wichtig, mich ein wenig zu distanzieren. Einiges war sogar unverzeihlich.
Was für Dinge meinen Sie damit unverzeihlich?
Naja, diese ganzen Inzweifelstellungen, dass das alles so war, wie es war. Dieses Misstrauen, dieses Paranoide. Da die Medien ja auch an allem dann zu zweifeln begannen und nicht nur an der Eintätertheorie. Und das hat mich halt auch sehr verletzt, weil ich mir dachte, mein Vater könnte ja auch seine eigene Ansicht für sich behalten. Er müsse sie ja nicht den Journalisten nahebringen.
Ich muss es, ja, aber ich kann nicht glauben an die Eintäter-Theorie. Wenn sie glaubt, das war nur ein Täter, das kann ja möglich sein. Das kann möglich sein.
Weiß es.
When Jennifer's body was released in 2009, audiences didn't quite know what to make of it. It was marketed as a sexy teen horror film. Megan Fox, who becomes possessed by a demon after a ritual goes wrong, transformed into a succubus, she begins to kill and consume male classmates to maintain her powers. The title itself was a rock reference, taken directly from Hole's 1994 song Jennifer's Body. Cody never claimed the story was based on any single real case, but over time people started suspecting the movie was inspired by the 1995 killing of 15-year-old Elise Paller, a high school student from California. Her story, while lesser known to the general public, is deeply disturbing. Elise Paller was described by everyone who knew her as creative and full of life. Her family lived in a quiet neighborhood near California's Central Coast, where life was slow and simple. In 1995, Elise attended Arroyo Grande High School, where she crossed paths with 3 teenage boys, Royce Casey, Jacob DeLashmutt, and Joseph Fiorella. The 3 were self-proclaimed metalheads. They spent most of their time listening to heavy metal, especially the band Slayer, and practicing together in a small garage where they called their own group Hatred. Fiorella, the youngest of the trio at 14, was obsessed with Satanism. He treated Slayer's lyrics as if they were sacred texts, studying them, quoting them, looking for meaning. His friends said he believed their songs weren't just entertainment but instructions. He began talking about performing a sacrifice, something that would bring power to their band. At first, it sounded like the kind of morbid talk teenage boys fall into for attention. But Fiorella wasn't joking. He told his friends that if they killed a virgin, they could make a deal with the devil himself, a ritual that would help them go professional with their music. The person he wanted to sacrifice was someone he knew from school, Elise Paller. On the night of July 22nd, 1995, Fiorella, DeLashmutt, and Casey called Elise and told her they were going to hang out in a eucalyptus grove near Nipomo Mesa, about 10 miles from her home. They told her they had marijuana, and she agreed to meet them. When she arrived, the boys led her deep into the trees. They started joking around, smoking, talking. But then, as Elise stood with her back turned, one of them looped a belt around her neck. Jacob DeLashmutt pulled first, strangling her. Joseph Fiorella stabbed her with a hunting knife. Royce Casey joined in. When she fell to the ground, Casey kicked her. None of the wounds were immediately fatal. Elise lay bleeding in the dirt as the boys watched her die. When she stopped moving, DeLashmutt was about to do something unthinkable, but Casey stopped him, saying they should just leave. The 3 buried her in a shallow grave, covered her body with dirt and brush, and walked away. For 8 months, Elise's family didn't know what had happened. She had vanished without a trace. Flyers went up around Arroyo Grande and surrounding counties. Search parties combed the nearby fields and beaches. Police questioned classmates and neighbors but found nothing. Then, in March 1996, one of the killers cracked. Royce Casey, now 17, had joined a Christian youth group and began feeling guilty. He went to a pastor and confessed everything. The pastor immediately alerted police, and Casey led investigators to the eucalyptus grove where Elise's body still lay partially buried, mummified by the California heat. Within hours, police arrested Casey, DeLashmutt, and Fiorella. All 3 were charged with murder. Investigators testified that the teens had planned the killing for months. They had chosen Elise because she was blonde, blue-eyed, and because, as they told police, she was a virgin. To them, that made her a perfect sacrifice for the devil. The district attorney's chief investigator recalled what Casey had told him. By making this perfect sacrifice to the devil, they would gain more craziness. That would make them play harder, play faster. And by making this perfect sacrifice, it might help them go professional. It was premeditated, ritualistic, and tied directly to Fiorella's obsession with satanic imagery in heavy metal music. Elise's parents, David and Lisanne Paller, blamed not only the boys, but also the band Slayer. They said the lyrics of songs like Postmortem and Dead Skin Mask had given the killers a roadmap. Detailed descriptions of how to perform what they did to the girl. In 1996, they filed a lawsuit against Slayer, arguing that the band's music had incited the murder, but the case was thrown out. The judge ruled there was no legal way to hold the band accountable, saying, "You might as well start looking through the library at every book on the shelf." Still, the Pallers didn't stop. They filed another lawsuit, claiming Slayer had knowingly distributed harmful material to minors. That one was dismissed too. Even one of the killers, Jacob DeLashmutt, later admitted the music wasn't to blame. The music is destructive, but that's not why Elise was murdered. She was murdered because Joe Fiorella was obsessed with her, and obsessed with killing her. All 3 boys were convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. They were teenagers when they committed the crime, Fiorella only 14, but their confessions left no room for doubt. Jacob de Lashmut served time at the correctional training facility. He was granted parole in July 2025, 30 years after the murder. Royce Casey, who first confessed, remained imprisoned at Valley State Prison. Casey was released a month after de Lashmut in August 2025. Joseph Fiorella, the ringleader, is still incarcerated at High Desert State Prison. His most recent parole hearing was scheduled for 2023. The 2003 survival thriller Open Water was written and directed by husband and wife filmmakers Chris Kentis and Laura Lau, both experienced scuba divers themselves. They wanted the film to feel as real as possible, and it was. The actors weren't surrounded by special effects or green screens. They were actually in the water, surrounded by real Caribbean reef and blacktip sharks. A shark handler floated nearby, just off camera, as the actors treaded water for hours while filming. The story concerns an American couple who go scuba diving while on vacation, only to find themselves stranded miles from shore in shark-filled waters when the crew of their boat accidentally leaves them behind. Behind the film's success lies the real-life story that inspired it, the disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Thomas Lonergan and his wife, Eileen Haynes, were a quiet, adventurous couple. Both were graduates of Louisiana State University. They met in college, fell in love, and got married in Texas. They weren't thrill seekers, but they loved travel and the outdoors. After college, they joined the Peace Corps, spending 2 years teaching on Funafuti Atoll, a small, remote island in Tuvalu. After that, they took another assignment in Fiji. They were experienced divers. In early 1998, they decided to take a break from their work and spend time exploring Australia's Great Barrier Reef. It was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. On January 25th, 1998, Tom and Eileen boarded the Outer Edge, a dive boat operated by a local company in Port Douglas, Queensland. The boat carried 26 passengers that day, including the couple. The destination was St. Crispin's Reef, one of the region's most popular dive sites, a mosaic of coral and blue water about 25 miles from shore. They dove 3 times that day. The sea was calm, visibility clear. On their last dive sometime after 3 p.m., the group returned to the surface, all except Tom and Eileen. Somehow, in the rush of checking tanks and counting heads, no one noticed they were missing. The Outer Edge pulled anchor and left for shore, leaving the couple behind in open water. It wasn't until 2 days later, January 27th, that anyone realized what had happened. When the Outer Edge was cleaned and prepared for another trip, a crew member found a canvas bag left behind. Inside were 2 wallets, a logbook, and clothes, all belonging to the Lonergans. That was when the truth hit. The couple had never returned from the reef. A massive air and sea search began immediately. Helicopters swept the area and patrol boats with divers moved across hundreds of miles of sea. But there was no sign of them. Days later, small clues began to appear. In February 1998, a woman's wetsuit washed ashore on a beach in North Queensland, about 75 miles from where they'd last been seen. It matched Eileen's size. Marine biologists studying the barnacles attached to the fabric determined it had been submerged since January. There was no evidence of a shark attack. Then, in June 1998, more of their gear surfaced on a beach near Port Douglas, 121 kilometers, or about 75 miles from St. Crispin's Reef. The items were unmistakably theirs: 2 inflatable dive jackets with the Lonergans' names written on them, and a small white board used for writing underwater. On it, written in shaky, desperate handwriting, were these words: Monday, January 26th, 1998. To anyone who can help us. We have been abandoned on Agincourt Reef by MV Outer Edge on Monday, January 25th, 1998. Please, help us before we die. That note proved that Tom and Eileen had survived at least a full day after the boat left. The discovery fueled countless theories. Some speculated that they might have staged their disappearance, faking their deaths to start a new life somewhere else, or ended their time at sea. These rumors came from Tom's personal diary, which police later found in their belongings. In one entry, he wrote about wanting a quick and peaceful end. Eileen's writings said she would stay by his side no matter the outcome, but Eileen's parents insisted those quotes were ripped out of context, and that much of the diary was never made public. They said the two were deeply in love and had every reason to live. Police agreed. Their bank accounts were untouched. Their insurance policies remained unclaimed. They had left everything behind. Experts testified that dehydration and exhaustion were the couple's likely cause of death. The ocean sun is merciless, and with each passing hour, dehydration sets in faster. Divers float on the surface believing help will come, but with no food, no fresh water, and nothing to shield them, their bodies weaken rapidly. A phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, stripping away clothing due to delirium, has been observed in hypothermia and heat exhaustion. It's likely what happened to them. Once they removed parts of their wetsuits and gear, they lost buoyancy. Without that, even the calmest diver can't stay afloat for long. Eileen's father, John Haynes, believed they became disoriented from the sun and salt water, drifted together, and eventually drowned, perhaps taken by the current or by sharks afterward. But there was never any clear evidence of an animal attack. The Australian media followed the story relentlessly. Locals were outraged. How could two people vanish in a tightly regulated diving industry without anyone noticing? The skipper of the Outer Edge, Jack, had failed to perform a proper head count. No one verified the physical presence of each person. For 2 days, the Outer Edge ran new trips. The coroner, Noel Noonan, dismissed all theories and formally charged Jack with the unlawful killing of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Though he was later acquitted, his company pleaded guilty to negligence. Outer Edge Dive was fined and went out of business soon after. Even years later, it still haunts people. They would have seen the dive boat vanish into a dot, and then into nothing. An American Crime was released in 2007. Directed by Tommy O'Haver, it was promoted as a psychological drama based on a true story. The director built the script largely from actual trial transcripts from the events that happened in Indiana in 1965. What took place there has since been described as one of the most brutal crimes in the state's history. In the summer of 1965, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens and her younger sister Jenny were living with their parents, Lester and Elizabeth. The Likens family didn't have much money. Their parents worked for traveling carnivals, selling concessions at fairs and festivals across the Midwest. When their mother was arrested for shoplifting that July, the family needed a temporary place for the two girls to stay while their parents traveled for work. Lester Likens made an arrangement with a woman he had recently met, a 37-year-old single mother named Gertrude Banisowski. Gertrude had 7 children of her own and lived in a small aging home in Indianapolis. She agreed to board Sylvia and Jenny for $20 a week, promising to care for them as if they were her own daughters. It was meant to be a short-term arrangement, just until November, when the Likens' parents would return to collect them. At first, life in the Banisowski home seemed ordinary. The sisters helped with chores, attended Sunday school with the family, and spent time with Gertrude's teenage daughters, Paula and Stephanie. Neighbors described Sylvia as polite, cheerful, and well-mannered. She got along with most of the Banisowski children, and for the first few weeks, there were no major problems. But by mid-July, the weekly payments from the Likens' parents started arriving late, sometimes by only a few days. Gertrude, who already struggled financially, began taking out her frustration on the girls. She started small in comparison to what would happen later: beatings with a paddle, yelling at them for eating too much food, accusing them of being a burden. When one of the payments was delayed longer than usual, Gertrude reportedly shouted, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing, and struck both girls repeatedly. Over time, her anger focused almost entirely on Sylvia. Witnesses later suggested jealousy played a role. Sylvia was young, pretty, and kind. Everything Gertrude felt she no longer was. The punishments grew crueler. Sylvia was forced to eat leftovers from the trash, denied meals, and beaten for the smallest perceived offenses. She was accused of stealing candy she had bought herself, and when she denied it, the beatings intensified. One evening, Sylvia mentioned a boy she had dated briefly while her family lived in California. Gertrude's questions turned invasive. When Sylvia admitted she had gone skating and to the beach with boys, Gertrude accused her of promiscuity and claimed she was pregnant. She mocked the girl, saying, "You're getting big in the stomach. Looks like you're going to have a baby." When Sylvia laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, Gertrude kicked her in the groin. Paula, Gertrude's daughter, who was 3 months pregnant herself, joined in, striking Sylvia. The violence quickly became a routine. At mealtimes, Gertrude and her children would force-feed Sylvia large amounts of food, spiced with condiments and pepper, until she got sick. I won't go into full detail of what they did to Sylvia, as it is too disturbing for YouTube. If you want to understand the depth of the situation this girl was in, all of the information is available in public documents. When Sylvia tried to fight back by spreading a rumor at school that Paula and Stephanie were prostitutes, the retaliation was severe. Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Hubbard, beat Sylvia violently, and when Gertrude found out, she joined in. From that point forward, the house became a place of constant torment. Gertrude's older children, Paula and John, took part in it all. So did neighborhood teenagers who came over regularly. In total, she would suffer more than 100 cigarette burns over the following months. Her younger sister, Jenny, was occasionally forced to take part under threat of being punished. Outside the home, no one realized how bad things had become. The girls still attended school for a time, but as Sylvia's bruises worsened, Gertrude stopped letting her leave the house. When a school nurse came by after a report of a girl with bruises living at the Banishevsky home, Gertrude lied, saying Sylvia had run away and returned filthy, claiming the wounds were self-inflicted. The nurse left and never came back. The Likens' parents visited once in early October. Neither Sylvia nor Jenny said anything about what was happening. Both were terrified of what would happen if they did. After their parents left, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and asked, "What are you going to do now? Now they're gone?" By this point, Sylvia was regularly going through the worst types of degradation and abuse. Gertrude's anger escalated into something darker. When Sylvia wet herself, she was accused of being filthy and thrown into the basement. She was rarely given food or water. One afternoon, Gertrude decided to brand Sylvia. Holding a heated needle, she began carving humiliating words into the girl's abdomen. She ordered 14-year-old Richard Hobbs to complete it. The crude letters left deep burns that would scar permanently. By late October, Sylvia's health was rapidly deteriorating. On October 25th, she tried to escape. Somehow, she managed to climb the basement stairs and reach the front door. She was too weak to open it before Gertrude caught her. Gertrude struck her repeatedly with a curtain rod until it bent in half. Sylvia was dragged back to the basement where she banged on the walls for help till the early hours of the morning. A neighbor later admitted hearing the noise but never called police. By the next day, Sylvia could barely move. Gertrude tried to feed her a donut and milk, but Sylvia was too weak to lift the glass. That afternoon, as neighborhood children gathered to watch, Sylvia muttered and mumbled incoherently. She tried to identify faces around her. When one of the boys sprayed her with a garden hose, Sylvia tried once more to crawl up the stairs. She collapsed halfway. Gertrude kicked her, then stood watching her in silence. At around 5:30 p.m. on October 26th, Sylvia Likens died. When police arrived at the Banishevsky home that evening, Gertrude tried to stage the scene. She led officers to Sylvia's body and handed them the note she had forced the girl to write earlier. A letter claiming she had been attacked by a group of boys, but the bruises, burns, and carvings on Sylvia's body told a different story. One of the officers noticed Sylvia's sister, Jenny, standing nearby and asked, what had happened. Jenny whispered, "You get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." Within hours, arrests were made. Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Baniszewski, along with Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were all taken into custody. Several other neighborhood children were questioned and later charged as witnesses. During interrogation, Gertrude downplayed her role, saying her daughter Paula did most of the damage.
I did never beat that girl. Never. She was beat up on by other girls. In fact, my own daughter socked her in the jaw and broke her wrist. And so, I mean, there you go. And girls around the neighborhood beat her up, bloodied her nose. One girl broke her nose, in fact, I think.
The younger children confirmed that this had gone on for months. The trial began in April 1966. After 17 days, the jury found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. Her daughter Paula was convicted of second-degree murder. Coy Hubbard, Richard Hobbs, and John Baniszewski Jr. were found guilty of manslaughter and served less than 2 years. Imprisoned, Gertrude became deeply religious. The woman who had tortured a 16-year-old girl was now preaching morality behind prison walls. Gertrude was paroled in 1985 after nearly 20 years in prison. She moved to Iowa and lived quietly until her death from lung cancer in 1990. She never fully accepted responsibility. When asked about the crime, she claimed she couldn't remember much of it, saying she had been on medication.
If you turn Gertrude Baniszewski loose, you might as well put me in prison, because I would be in prison in my own home, afraid to go anywhere by myself again.
Baniszewski told the parole board she's a born-again Christian. She burst into tears when asked to talk about her crime.
I can't do it, and I'm sorry. That's all I can say. And I ask him to forgive me. That's all I can tell you.
Once again, the board voted 3-2 to let Baniszewski go.
The bottom line, you cannot bring someone who is dead and gone back to life. And I wouldn't be a member of this board if I didn't believe people could change.
Her daughter Paula was released much earlier. She served about 7 years and was paroled in 1972. Afterwards, she changed her name to Paula Pace and moved to Iowa. She found work as an aide to a school counselor. For 14 years, she lived under her new identity, hiding her connection to the murder that had shocked the nation. In 2012, the school district discovered who she really was. She was immediately fired. By then, she was married with 2 children. Gertrude's second eldest daughter, Stephanie, avoided prison altogether. She had cooperated with investigators, testified against her mother, and the charges against her were dropped. She later changed her name and became a teacher. As for the other neighborhood children who had joined in the torment, the charges against them were eventually dropped. Randy Lepper, one of the kids, smirked during his testimony as he admitted to everything. Most of them tried to disappear into anonymity. Jenny Likens, Sylvia's younger sister, tried to live a normal life, but never fully recovered. She married, had 2 children, and settled in Indiana, but suffered from anxiety and heart problems for decades. She died in 2004 at 54. Years earlier, she had clipped Gertrude Baniszewski's obituary from the newspaper and mailed it to her mother with a short note reading, "Some good news. Damn old Gertrude died. I'm happy about that." Her parents, Lester and Elizabeth Likens, both died years later. Jenny often told reporters that they shouldn't be blamed for what happened. They had simply trusted a woman who promised to take care of their daughters. The 2022 film The Good Nurse, starring Jessica Chastain and Eddie Redmayne, feels like a slow, quiet thriller. It's based on the true story of Charles Cullen, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. A nurse who spent 16 years moving from hospital to hospital, killing patients who trusted him. Jessica Chastain plays Amy Lochran, the real-life nurse who helped stop him. She advised the filmmakers personally, ensuring that the medical details, the emotions, and her complex relationship with Cullen were shown truthfully. Chastain and Redmayne even went through a short nursing boot camp to make their performances realistic. Charles Cullen's life began with isolation. He was born in New Jersey in 1960. the youngest of 8 children in a troubled Catholic family. His father died when Charles was still an infant. His mother died when he was 17. From there, his life spiraled. He joined the U.S. Navy after high school, serving aboard the submarine USS Woodrow Wilson. The Navy's psychological tests cleared him for duty, even though his fellow sailors thought he was strange. He was bullied constantly, hazed, and made fun of. One day, his commanding officer found him sitting at the missile control station, wearing a surgical mask, gloves, and scrubs, in the middle of his shift. No one ever understood why. He was disciplined and transferred to a supply ship. There, his mental health unraveled further. He was repeatedly admitted to psychiatric wards. Eventually, he was medically discharged from the Navy in 1984. That same year, Cullen found something new: nursing. He enrolled at Mountainside Hospital's nursing school in Montclair, New Jersey, and, surprisingly, he excelled. He graduated in 1987 and took a job in the burn unit at St. Barnabas Medical Center. He also got married that year. His wife, Adrienne, noticed strange behavior almost immediately. He mistreated the family's dogs, spiked people's drinks with lighter fluid for fun, and burned his daughter's books. By 1993, Adrienne filed for divorce and a restraining order, saying she feared for her life. But the darkness inside Cullen had already begun long before that. His first known murder was in 1988, just a year after he started nursing. He gave a lethal dose of intravenous medication to a patient at St. Barnabas. He later admitted to killing several more, including an AIDS patient he injected with a deadly dose of insulin. When the hospital noticed a spike in unexplained deaths and contaminated IV bags, Cullen quietly resigned. He was never charged. By the time investigators finished their internal review, Cullen was already working somewhere else. In February 1992, he started at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. He murdered at least 3 elderly women there using the heart medication digoxin. One of them even said before dying that a sneaky male nurse had injected her in her sleep, but her warning was ignored. Cullen divorced around this time and began living alone in a basement apartment. He claimed he wanted to quit nursing, but said he couldn't afford to. The courts required him to pay child support. He started stalking a co-worker, breaking into her house while she slept. She pressed charges and he got probation. This cycle would repeat for years. After being fired from Warren, Charles Cullen worked at several hospitals, including Hunterdon Medical Center, where he later admitted to killing at least 5 patients with digoxin. Despite repeated suspicions and firings for poor performance, hospitals continued hiring him due to a nursing shortage and the absence of a centralized misconduct tracking system. Each institution quietly dismissed him without reporting concerns, allowing him to move freely from one job to another. By 1998, Cullen was working in Pennsylvania, where his pattern continued across multiple hospitals. He killed patients at Liberty Nursing Center, Easton Hospital, Lehigh Valley Hospital, and St. Luke's Hospital. It was at St. Luke's that co-workers first grew suspicious. A nurse found unused medication vials in the disposal bin, drugs that couldn't be used recreationally or sold. Investigators traced them to Cullen. Rather than fire him outright, the hospital offered him a deal: resign quietly and receive a neutral reference or be terminated. He resigned in June 2002. 7 of his co-workers contacted the local district attorney's office, warning that they believed Cullen was murdering patients. Their warnings were ignored. That same year, Cullen found his final job at Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. On paper, it was a step up, a critical care unit with advanced monitoring systems. In reality, it became the perfect hunting ground. Between 2002 and 2003, Cullen killed at least 13 patients there, using digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine. He accessed the digital drug cabinet constantly, checking out medications his assigned patients didn't need. The computer logs showed him canceling drug orders and making multiple requests within minutes, but no one acted. In June 2003, he attempted to kill a patient named Philip Gregor, who survived and was discharged. By October, 5 more people were dead. That same month, a patient's mysterious death from hypoglycemia finally pushed the hospital to call police. Cullen was fired on Halloween 2003 for lying on his job application. The investigation moved quickly once detectives Dan Baldwin and Tim Braun got involved. They interviewed dozens of staff members and brought in Amy Loughran, Cullen's close friend at Somerset. Amy had worked beside him for months and had never imagined what he was doing. When she learned the truth, she agreed to help. With a wiretap hidden under her clothing, Amy met Cullen for coffee and gently confronted him. The detectives listened in from a nearby van. He didn't confess outright, but the tension broke him. 2 days later, they arrested him at a restaurant on December 12, 2003. At first, Cullen admitted to only 2 murders, one of Florian Gall and an attempted murder of Jin Kyung-han. But during interrogation, he began to talk more freely, saying he had killed as many as 40 people over 16 years. Later, the number was believed to be far higher, possibly over 400. In April 2004, Cullen pleaded guilty to 13 murders and 2 attempted murders in New Jersey. In November, he pleaded guilty in Pennsylvania to killing 6 patients and trying to kill 3 others. During court proceedings, he repeatedly interrupted the judge, chanting, "Your Honor, you need to step down." He had to be gagged with cloth and duct tape to finish sentencing. In 2006, Cullen was given 18 consecutive life sentences in New Jersey and 6 more in Pennsylvania. He will never be eligible for parole. Cullen told investigators that he didn't kill out of malice. He said he overdosed patients to, quote, end their suffering and to spare them from painful cardiac arrests. Cullen's reasoning was contradictory. Sometimes he claimed he acted on impulse. Other times, he said he blacked out and couldn't remember killing anyone. He described his life as being in a fog. The reality, though, was that he chose drugs like digoxin and insulin because they were easy to access, hard to trace, and lethal in the right doses. He knew exactly what he was doing. Investigators later determined that several facilities had strong suspicions about him but chose silence over scandal. After his arrest, lawmakers in New Jersey and Pennsylvania passed new laws requiring hospitals to report preventable deaths and retain employee disciplinary records for at least 7 years. It was a single nurse who finally stopped him, a colleague who saw the good in him for far too long, until she realized that the man she worked beside every day was quietly ending lives 1 injection at a time.